Well, good morning. I hope your Sunday is off to a great start. There are a lot of issues being debated in Washington that have a direct impact on life here in Upper Michigan. This morning we'll talk with someone who is very much part of that debate. It all starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Now here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, Gary Peters has a long record of service in government at several levels. Starting as a city councilman in Rochester Hills, Michigan in 1991, he was elected to the Michigan Senate in 1994 and to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2008. In 2014, he ran successfully for the U.S. Senate to replace the retiring Carl Levin. Senator Peters is our guest this morning. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Don. It's great to be with you.
It's good to have you here. You know, I'd like to take a minute with each guest to have our audience get to know you a little better. So, you have a very busy schedule, I know, but when you have some free time, what do you like to do, or what do you and your family like to do?
Well, I just like spending time with my family when I get a chance, which is great. I have 3 children. I have a son who's out on his own now, but a college student who's in her junior year, and another daughter who's about ready to go to college. And so certainly love spending time with them. But if I really want to get out just to kind of unwind, what I like to do is I like riding my motorcycle. I'm a motorcyclist, so if I can have the wind in my face and get out on the open road, I'm a very happy man.
Okay. And you are also an investment advisor at some point. Do you have any investment advice for us?
Yeah, I don't want to share that on the air perhaps, but I did. I spent over 20 years in the investment world in the private sector before getting into public service.
And you also spent some time as the commissioner of the Michigan Lottery. What are the challenges you face in that position?
Well, I really enjoyed that. It was, it's basically raising money for public schools. We were able to raise record amounts for public schools when I was there, and basically when during my tenure, we also launched the Club Keno, which was one of the most successful new game launches in the lottery history. It's where folks go to their local bar and can play Keno while they're there, and that added a great deal to revenues for public schools.
You're new in your job, fairly new, only 6 months perhaps, but you had several years in Congress, or 8 years, or 6 years in Congress before that. Did that kind of help you hit the ground running when you got there? Yeah,
there's no question having 6 years in the House was very, very important. The Senate is different, and I enjoy that part of it so far in my brief tenure. The House, as you know, has 435 members, so it's a very large body. Right. The Senate, we only have 100 members, and the thing that I enjoy most about it is that it really allows me to develop relationships with folks on both sides of the aisle. It's more difficult in the House, but here I've able to, in a relatively short period of time, work on legislation with some of my Republican colleagues in a bipartisan way. I've already passed 2 bills out of the Senate. One's already been signed into law by the President. That's difficult to do if I was a freshman member and in the minority party in the House. That's pretty hard to do, but we're able to do that in the Senate.
So you feel even in the minority party you've been able to make some progress in getting some of your concerns dealt with?
Most definitely. And that's the key thing. And you got to reach across the aisle. You got to find things that you have in common. There's certainly clear differences between where Democrats and Republicans are on some of the major issues. But if you boil it down, there's a lot that we have in common. And I certainly work whenever I introduce bills, if possible. I always work with a Republican colleague to make it bipartisan. I think that's the way good public policy is made.
One of the stops you made on this particular trip was at the Black Rocks Brewery in Marquette. And you know what's really interesting to me is Professor Russ Manyagi, on the faculty at Northern, retired now, a historian, has written a book on breweries in the UP. And actually that was part of our early history. Back in the middle 1800s, as the iron mines were developing, so were these local breweries. And as you look at the brewing industry, you've seen it grow and then get the large breweries, and they kind of body each other, and you're down to 2 or 3 large breweries now, but all these small breweries starting out. That's great for small business, isn't it?
It is, and it's exciting. That's why I've been working very closely with the industry to continue to make it grow. But I think you saw that we had robust craft brewery really prior to Prohibition, and then after Prohibition it changed it quite a bit, and as you said, it was dominated by a few players. But what we're finding is consumers like to have the choice of having a very unique beer or brew, or even micro distilleries that's produced in their local hometown. And as you said, these are entrepreneurs that creating jobs locally. They are also bringing tourism, as tourists look for places where they have microbrews as part of the fun of traveling. And the other thing that I think is particularly interesting for us here in Michigan is that we're located in an ideal location to grow hops. So this is about our agricultural industry as well. And as our craft brewers are making beer, they'd also like to use natural products from Michigan as well. There's an incredible market for that, and so we're also going to be able to create jobs in agriculture as well.
And you've also worked on some legislation to help those brewers. What will that do for them?
Yeah, that's what I was in Black Rocks today, or earlier this week, talking about things that I think are important, and one of them is in order to lower the excise tax that brewers have. Right now they pay about $7 per gallon. We want to cut that in half in order to help particularly small craft brewers who are trying to make it. The capital costs of starting a brewer are very high. The excise taxes make it difficult, so if we can cut that in half, that'll help places like Black Rocks. In fact, as when I was there, they mentioned that it's an opportunity for them to hire additional people because they can make more investment. And a great story about that, you have two entrepreneurs, local guys who started this business, and now they're selling their beer not only throughout the UP, but also throughout Michigan, and would like to expand even further. And that's going to mean more jobs in Marquette.
And there are some others doing the same thing in other parts of the Upper Peninsula and, of course, throughout the state as well.
Absolutely. You know, we have over 150 craft distillers now in Michigan. We rank 6th in the country, so it's really one of the fastest growing areas in the country. And I just think it's you know, it's an example, as you mentioned, where small businesses creating jobs in our local communities and helping the whole economy grow. There's a lot of spillover effects as well.
I want to talk some more about jobs, but we have to take a break. I'll be back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. We're talking today with Michigan Senator Gary Peters, talking about jobs before the break. Upper Peninsula doing fairly well. The natural resource industries generally doing well. We are having some problems in the iron mining industry. One of the challenges, according to Cliff's chairman, is steel imports. Have you had a chance to look at that issue or deal with that issue?
Well, I share the concerns, and have been concerned about imports, the impact that it's having on domestic steel production, and therefore a market for the iron ore that we mine here in the Upper Peninsula. We have certainly some trade violations. As you know, the U.S. government has been taking Chinese and others to court as violations of the World Trade Organization. I think we've won, actually, for some dumping of steel in the markets. There's going to be decisions on some countervailing tariffs, which will hopefully address some of that later this month and then into the fall. But ultimately, the thing that I think is particularly egregious and one that we have to deal with is currency manipulation, and that's what we've seen countries like Japan, China, and others engage in, where they artificially depress their currency in order to really give an unfair advantage. And unless we deal with that, we're going to have continued problems. And I've been working on legislation to go after them and to make the market fair. That's all we're asking. We're not just have it fair, and do not let countries manipulate their currency to give them an unfair advantage when it comes to steel.
How do we get there? What's it going to take to make that happen?
Well, I was hoping to get it in the TPP, which is this trade agreement that is going forward, but unfortunately that wasn't possible, so we're going to have to write some new legislation and get it through the Congress and to the President. I think if the United States actively engages in doing a counter actions to this currency manipulation, all we have to do is do that a couple times and they will stop, but we're going to have to move that through Congress, and I'm prepared to do that.
Discussion going on now about more trade pacts. Are you supportive? Or?
Well, I did not vote for the TPP primarily because there was no language regarding currency manipulation. And I say, you know, we can't have trade if the rules are not fair. We're not asking for any special protections. We're just saying it needs to be fair, and we can't let other countries take advantage of it. So unless we have fair trade that puts us on a level playing field, I'm not going to support those.
You are doing some other things that could be beneficial for iron mining and others. One is trying to get funding for the Sioux locks to add a new lock. Can we make some progress there?
I think so. You know, certainly the economics are overwhelming as to what would happen if a lock is damaged, and especially the large lock. There's only one lock that can take some of these large freighters, and it would be catastrophic. We already know now with the lock being repaired in the Sioux, the impact that is having on the economy. But you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars very rapidly. So there's a strong economic case to get the Corps of Engineers. I've been working very diligently on that. I'm working with Senator Stabenow, my colleague, And we're going to continue to focus on it. I think it's important not just for Michigan. This is something that's important for the whole country, which is why the entire Senate needs to be concerned about it.
And of course, this has been under consideration for a long time now.
Long time.
Yeah.
Right.
Just a matter of getting the money.
We just cannot give up. I mean, obviously, it's tough to get money now in Washington. We've had a lot of cutbacks. We want to reduce the deficit. But this is about good economics, that if we don't make these kinds of important investments in core infrastructure like our locks, it's going to end up costing us a lot more money than what we would spend on it.
And you're also working to get more ice breaking capacity on the Great Lakes?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I spent some time, last time I was up here with folks from the Inland Steamship Company. I was on the Obastar, their freighter that was loading, or their ore boat that was loading up, and talked about the problem, especially these last 2 seasons, as we've had complete ice coverage. There has been hundreds of millions of dollars lost as well in revenue because of the ice. Our current Coast Guard fleet is old, it's aging. We only have one heavy icebreaker. We need to have another. So I'm working to get an authorization for an additional icebreaker to be constructed and placed into service here in the Great Lakes.
And that new, heavy icebreaker now is the new Mackinac, I believe, which is not new anymore.
Not anymore. It's about close to 10 years old now,
Yeah.
and those 10 years have been a hard 10 years, especially these last 2 years. And you know, it takes a while to get appropriations for an icebreaker. It takes a while to get it built, so we have to start now. The Coast Guard has roughly nine vessels that can do ice breaking, but most of them are smaller. They're buoy tenders and others. And some of those were commissioned in the 1970s. I mean, 1970s. And so it's time to upgrade the fleet. And if we continue to have winters like we've had these last 2 seasons with the ice, we're going to have that capacity.
And those ships do take a beating, too.
Absolutely.
You have a plan to revitalize waterfront communities. What do you hope to accomplish with that?
Well, we want to help waterfront communities in their plans, designs on how to fully utilize waterfronts. Oftentimes waterfront communities, as you know, and certainly folks here in Marquette and all the waterfront communities that exist throughout the Upper Peninsula have some unique challenges depending on the ice, as we talked about, changing lake levels, all sorts of conditions that require planning. So I've introduced legislation working with a senator from Wisconsin who we share concerns with the Great Lakes, but also a senator from Maine and from Oregon on the other coast. So we've got the East Coast, the West Coast, and the Great Lakes coast coming together, trying to get federal resources to help local communities plan their waterfronts to utilize them more fully, and in the process, of course, help the local economy.
The one other shifting gear is that the Postal Service has proposed closing facilities here in the UP and elsewhere in the state of Michigan, and you have some concerns about that and at least want to delay the process?
Absolutely. It's the closing of some of the processing centers and moving them. In fact, here in the UP, they're looking at closing the processing center here and moving it to Green Bay, Wisconsin, which is a long ways away. And that's what we're seeing. It's a disturbing trend with rural areas that these processing centers are being closed and the distances increase. And what that means is a delay in mail. It takes longer for mail to get to people. And we have big challenges with the Postal Service, and I'm working on that through my committee to make sure that they can change their business model. But the one thing that we know is that if you're in business, it's difficult to continue to stay in business if you continue to offer less services to your customers.
Right.
And so when delivery rates go down and we're not really reducing costs, a lot of these processing center moves aren't reducing cost, and yet they're adding to the time it takes to deliver mail. That's a no-win proposition, not only for customers but for the Postal Service. So I've talked to the Postmaster General about it, and she has delayed closing some of these centers, but we believe a 2-year delay is important while we figure out next moves.
Okay, a lot more questions still. We'll get to those very shortly. Back with more on the Ryan Report after one more break. Again, our guest this morning is Senator Gary Peters. Veterans issues are a concern of a lot of people. Do you feel we've made progress in dealing with the health issues, making sure that veterans are getting the health care they need?
We still have ways to go. I think we've made some big strides from some of the very bad news that came out earlier this year, but we have a ways to go. I take it very seriously. We owe obligation to our veterans to make sure that they are taken care of. They earn it. They deserve that care. We've got to get people into the VA quicker. We've made that headway. Although one area that I'm working on right now is, which is brought to my attention by some veterans groups, is that we have some veterans who have suffered from PTSD, traumatic brain injury, some of these hidden scars of war. We have we know a lot more about it. We are diagnosing it, but in some cases, folks have been discharged out of the military because of some behavioral changes that occurred, but then and on a dishonorable basis. And so when they've been discharged dishonorably, and then it turns out they had PTSD, they can't go to the VA in order to get the treatment. So I've introduced legislation that says if we've got medical evidence and it's substantiated by the VA, that these veterans can come back, they can have their discharge changed, and they can get the help that they need, they deserve, and they should have something as a country. We can't turn our back on our veterans. So I'm certainly pleased to have a bipartisan support with some Republicans that have joined me, as well as having groups like the VFW and Disabled Veterans of America supporting my legislation.
So we have people who have served and probably suffered these
Right.
Injuries or problems in the military, and this is a chance to make sure they get a chance to get the right treatment.
Absolutely. There isn't anything more important than that.
There are just so many national issues you're going to have to deal with.
Yeah.
Iran, I see recently that Senator Schumer said he would not support it.
Right.
One of the Democrats who will not. Have you
Right.
made
Right.
up your mind yet?
I haven't. I've been spending a lot of time on this issue. It's an important issue. It may be one of the most serious votes that I'll have however long I serve in the U.S. Senate. I've spoken directly to President Obama about the issue, Secretary Kerry. We've had a number of briefings, some of those classified with our intelligence folks. There are also strong feelings on the other side against it, and I've been meeting with those individuals. And right now that I'm back in Michigan, I've been spending time talking to folks who care very deeply about this throughout the state as well. So I'm still in the process of thinking it through. The vote will come around the second week of September.
Social Security is always a concern. I did read recently where there's a concern we're going to run out of funding for the disability benefits. We're going to be able to find a solution for that problem?
Well, we have to. We have to find that. We have to work that this fall, and we also have to make sure that Social Security is solid and sustainable for the foreseeable future. It's a sacred promise that we have as a country to our senior citizens. Our seniors have paid into the Social Security system. They need to know that that's there. And half of the folks in this country rely on Social Security for a majority of their retirement income. It is absolutely essential that Social Security stays strong and that we can continue to live up to that obligation.
What's it going to take? Is it going to take additional tax revenue or
well, it's going
changes in the system?
It's going to have to change, I think, some of the system and how we look at the payments in. I mean, the thing that's interesting is that when Ronald Reagan put forward a lot of the reforms of Social Security, and at that time said that Social Security would be around forever. At that time, about 90% of all of the income in America went into or was taxed into the Social Security system. Since that time, it's about 80%, and the reason is that most of the growth in income has occurred to the folks at the very top. The top 1% have basically taken all of the increase of earnings that we've seen over that time, and as a result of that, we don't have as many people paying in as much money. So we've got to grow the middle class. Bottom line, we've got to grow the middle class in this country. If you have a strong, vibrant middle class, you have a strong Social Security system.
We have less than 30 seconds. The craziness with presidential races starting so early. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a Hillary Clinton supporter. I believe she'll be the next president of the United States, and believe that she's talking about issues like income inequality that we have to address as a country.
Okay. Thanks very much for coming in to be with us this morning. Appreciate it very much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Our guest has been Senator Gary Peters. I'll be back with some other thoughts for you after we take this break. I think we hit it right on the nose. You know, there's an old expression that says, be careful what you ask for. The note of caution implies that you might actually get it, and in fact, you may get even more than you were looking for. You ask for a little rain to water your lawn and garden, and along comes a downpour that washes some of your plants away. You ask for the weather to warm up, and it gets too hot. Anyway, the expression came to mind this week when a friend said to me, well, you got what you asked for. He could tell from the perplexed look on my face that I didn't know what he was talking about, so he said, Dombrowski, the Tigers fired Dave Dombrowski. You said on your show last week the Tigers' poor season was his fault. And of course he was right, but that wasn't the outcome I was hoping for. I know my comment had nothing to do with Tiger owner Mike Ilitch's decision, but I felt bad anyway. I think as a fan of sports at the professional level, one of the rights you have is to complain once in a while. It's fun, it's part of the game. You always have to cheer for your team, but it's okay now and then to blame the manager, the general manager, or one of those highly paid players if your team isn't doing well. As far as Dombrowski is concerned, I really did not want to see the Tigers let him go. He played a major role in bringing quality baseball back to Detroit and deserved better treatment than he received from the Tigers' owner. The ineptitude of that ownership became even more evident when they didn't even take part in the press conference where new general manager Al Avila was left to answer a lot of questions he didn't have the answers to. What have I learned from all this? When I made the comment last week, my guest was former Detroit Tiger pitcher John Hiller, who spent his whole career with the Tigers. Two among many points he made in that discussion included the fact that money is definitely changing the game, and that one of those changes involves the fact that when he was playing, there was a greater tendency for players to stay together on the same team. So today it's not just players who frequently move or move out, it also extends to managers who are often the first to be the scapegoat, and now to general managers as well. And all this reminds me of one of my favorite Jerry Seinfeld comedy routines. I can't really do it justice, but I'll do it anyway. This is what Seinfeld had to say. Loyalty to any one sports team is pretty hard to justify because the players are always changing. The team could move to another city. You're actually rooting for the clothes when you get right down to it. You know what I mean? You're standing and cheering and yelling for your clothes to beat the clothes from another city. Fans will be so in love with a player, but if he goes to another team, they boo him. This is the same human being in a different shirt, and they hate him now. Well, there's a lot of truth in that comedy bit. So often the players on a team are like a revolving door. We just get to know them and they're gone. And that leaves us cheering for the uniform, not the people in them. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Just about time to wrap it up for another Sunday morning. The Today Show is about ready to roll. Remember, anytime you miss our show, it's available on the internet. You will find it at uppermichigansource.com. The latest show is usually available starting at about noon on Monday. Also like to hear from you. Our email address is the Ryan Report at chesstv.com. Thanks to Senator Gary Peters for joining us this morning. It was a good chance to get some updates on all that's happening in Washington. For now, that's it. Have a great day. Join us next Sunday morning.